Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's tutorial we are going to be learning how to sew a simple pencil dress with lace sleeves. Okay, so if you're seeing this channel for the first time, welcome and do well to subscribe, and my returning subscribers, thank you for always watching. So let's get started. For this tutorial, the material we'll be using are our Ankara fabric, our zip, our thread, our lining, and our lace. Don't forget your ruler and your chalk too. So I went ahead to fold the fabric into two pieces. I folded the area I'll be working with. Then I went ahead to measure 1 inch through to form my starting line. After that was done, I went ahead to take my ruler and roll across the lines. On the starting line, I went ahead to measure my neck width. I took 3 inches for the width and 3 inches for the depth. Then I also went ahead to make a curve at that point with my curve rule. The next thing I did was to take my shoulder measurement, divide by 2. After marking that, I came down from my shoulder by 1 inch to form my shoulder slope. Then I went ahead to measure my vertical measurements, my shoulder to nipple, my half length, and my hip line. Then I also went ahead to take the length at which I want the gown to stop at. I also added 2 inches allowance at the length of the gown. So the next thing I did was to make the same measurement across the fabric so I could have straight lines when I am about rolling them. So the next thing I'll be doing is to get my armhole curve. For that, I used my bust measurement divided by 6 plus 1.5 inch. Then I marked it there. That will be forming the chest line. So to ensure that I was accurate, like my markings were straight, I also took the shoulder measurement there. Then I went ahead to make a straight line from the shoulder slope to the armhole to the chest line. Then I ruled through. So the next thing I did was to take my ruler and place it on the neckline to the part I measured for my armhole slope, my shoulder slope, the 1 inch I measured earlier. So placing my measuring tape on that line, I divided what I had there by 2. At that point where I got half of what I had there, I came in by 0.5 inch to draw the shoulder curve, to draw the armhole curve for the front. Under my chest line, I took my bust measurements divided by 4 and I marked it there. Then I went ahead to connect that point to the 0.5 inch and to the shoulder slant. After that was done, I went ahead to rule out my lines. So from my shoulder to nipple point, I took my bust measurements divided by 4 and I marked. Then I added 1.5 inch for sewing allowance and I also marked that. Then I went ahead to the waistline, took my waist measurements divided by 4, marked it, 1 inch for that and 1.5 inch for sewing allowance. I also went to my hip line, took my hip measurements divided by 4, marked it, and 1.5 sewing allowance. At the length of the dress, I just took my hip measurements divided by 4 without the allowance. I divided my hip measurements by 4 and just marked the point there. Then I went ahead to connect my lines together. As we can see, we've already formed the shape of a dress. Now the next thing I'll be doing is to take my dart measurement. For my dart, I'll be going in by my nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2 plus half inch. Then I came up by 4 inches and also came down by 4 inches to make a dart of 8 inches length. At that point, I just took in my nipple to nipple measurements divided by 2 plus half inch, just like I did on the waistline, and I did it for the upper part too. Then I went ahead to draw a straight line. And the next thing I'll be doing is on the waistline, I took half inch on both sides to connect it to the upper part of the dart and the lower part of the dart. Just watch what I'm doing. That will be all for the dart. Then I'll go ahead to cut. Now I'm done cutting. I'll fold it and keep it aside. Then trim off the excess I had on the fabric. Then I'm going to proceed to cut the back of the dress. So what I'll be doing is folding my work piece for the back dress, the back part of the dress, and when I'm folding it, I will ensure that it is enough for me to cut for my hip, and also when I add my zipper allowance, I would not run short of fabric. So I was just basically comparing the back with the front here. So after I've measured and I've seen that the amount of fabric I folded will be enough for me, I am just going to go ahead and mark 1.5 inch at the edge of the fabric for my zipper allowance. I'll mark it from the top to the bottom of the fabric. I'll mark it throughout the fabric. Then I'm going to proceed to make a straight line across the point I've marked. So I am going to proceed to take my neck measurement. So for the back pattern, I want the neck at the back to be higher than that of the front. So I still came in by 3 inches width and 1.5 length for the neck, but that was after I had measured my starting line across. So from the starting line, I came down by 1.5 inches and I went in by 3 inches, just like I stated earlier. So that will be for the neck part. Then I'm going to proceed to make a curve at that point and ensure my curve is coming out towards the zipper allowance area. Then because the armhole for the back is going to be different from the front, I'm going to take another armhole measurement. So I basically took my back measurement, came down by 1.1 inches for my shoulder slope. Then from that 1 inch, I measured my chest line, which is my bust measurement divided by 6 plus 1.5. At that point, I took in my bust measurement. Then I went ahead to take my vertical measurement, that is my chest line, my waist measurement, my shoulder to hip, and the length at which I want the gown to be, plus 2 inch allowance, just like I did in the front part. So I went ahead to also take it at different points of the dress so I can make a straight line. So I went ahead to make a straight line from the shoulder slant to my chest line so I can draw my armhole curve. Then as well, mark out my shoulder slant. So on the chest line, I took in my bust measurement divided by 4 and marked to enable me to draw my shoulder curve, my armhole curve rather. At that point, I also added my 1.5 inch for the armhole curve. that is the allowance at that area, because basically I'm not going to be taking my hip measurement and my waist measurement like I did for the front. I'll just be using the front pattern to cut the rest. So I just measured that part to make sure it's aligned. I measured it to start as a starter or to serve as a template. Then I went ahead to place my front pattern on the back pattern. After I placed it, I discovered that the armhole in front was more than the one at the back, so it was not aligning at that point. So I just measured the armhole, then had to now retake the armhole for the back pattern. I had to make my corrections so it's going to align. So at this point I've already made the corrections. Then I'll be placing the front pattern on the back pattern again to draw out the waistline and the hip line, to draw out the shape of the dress basically. At the hip line, I had to ensure that the pattern is not small there, the back piece rather is not small there. So I noticed it was small. I made my little adjustment, then I continued. So at this point everything was properly placed and the lines were matching, so I just cut out the pattern with my scissors. So now the front and the back piece is ready. So at the back piece I went in by half an inch from the waistline. I went in by half an inch from the waistline. Then I took my ruler, then connected it to the upper part of the dress and also to the lower part of the dress. I connected it into the dress. This will help eliminate zipper bulge. After that was done, I proceeded to cut it out. Then I also separated the two back pieces. So the next thing I'll be doing is to cut my lining piece for both the front and the back. So I arranged my lining piece. I'll be using my lining to turn the lower part of the dress. So I went ahead to take 1 inch across the lower part of the dress, then secured with my pin. This will enable me cut the lining in a way that the lining is going to be shorter than the actual fabric, and when I connect them together I'll be able to use the lining to turn the lower part of the fabric in. After I did that, I noticed that my lining was not going to be enough if I placed it in this way I am placing it currently. So what I did was to adjust my lining in a way that it would be enough after a series of measurements and placement. And this happened because I didn't get enough from the market. So once you want to make yours, you can get enough. So finally I found a way to go around it. After measuring, I found it was okay for me to cut. Then I went ahead to cut my lining piece with the dress pattern. And I'll also be doing the same thing for the back pattern too. Before I went ahead to cut the lining for the back, I also folded the bottom part by 1 inch. Okay, I'll be using the lace to make a design in the front. So what I proceeded to do was to remove my pins, which I used to fold it. Then I opened up the front piece of the dress. Then I went ahead this to design on the lace is going to be slanted. I made sure so that I arranged the part of the lace that has the design. Once I was done with it, I secured it and then I went ahead to flip it over to cut. So once I flipped it over, I noticed that it was not lying flat, like the lace was not lying flat on the dress. So I had to turn it over to the front side. So again, at this point, I just arranged cut wheel and went before I turned it to the wrong side and cut out the lace I'll be using. So the next thing I'll be doing is to trim out the design of the lace. So you can see how it's looking like. The design is already out, see the outcome, and the shape of the sides are still on the lace. Now I'm going to proceed to cut the sleeve of the dress. At this point, I've already folded my fabric into 4. Then I measured my fabric and then I noticed that it was short. It was not going to give me exactly what I want. The width was kind of shorter than the armhole round. So I had to rearrange it to a part that is going to be fitting. So after all trial and errors, it was not still working. So I now went ahead to rearrange it, and I wanted the cuff part to be at the sleeve end. So I arranged it in a way that when I am cutting the armhole curls and everything, it won't be affecting the curved part. I'll be able to have some trimmings to cut out separately and attach to the sleeve, the end of the sleeves, to give it the design I wanted. So at this point, I was already done arranging the sleeves in a way that it won't affect the end trimmings. So this is me ensuring that the edges are straight and the fabric is okay to start drafting these sleeves. Then I went ahead to measure the sleeve length minus 1 inch because I'll be adding trimmings at the end. Then at where I want the sleeve to stop, I ruled a straight line with my free hand. Then I measured my shoulder to elbow and ruled a straight line too. Then from the place I picked from as my starting point, I came down by 5 inch and also came in by 4 inches. Then I'll also be marking the 4 inches up too. Then place my measuring tape in a way that I will get the middle. So from there, I am going to make markings on the biceps line. I'll be dividing my bicep measurement by 2 and then adding 1.5 extra for sewing allowance. On the elbow, I divided my elbow measurement by 2. I marked it there. Then I also added 1.5 for sewing allowance. At the wrist part, I also divided my wrist measurement by 2. I marked it. Then I also marked 1.5 for sewing allowance. Then I went ahead to draw a straight line from the biceps to the elbow to the wrist. So from the top, I'm just going to go ahead to make my armhole curve. After I was done with that, I measured round the armhole curve to see if it would be enough for my armhole. So after that was done, I noticed it was enough. Then I went ahead to cut. I also made a notch to determine the middle of the sleeves. Then I went ahead to cut out my sleeves. Because I wanted to have trimmings at the end of the sleeve, I just took one of the sleeve and measured the length of the wrist where I'll be attaching the trimmings to. So after I had gotten what I want, I just went ahead to fold it into 2 and then cut it out. I am done with the sleeves. Back to the main fabric, that's the front. I am just going to place my lining, then go ahead to the sewing machine and sew on the lace. I am just going to fix my lace to the area of the clothes I wanted to be. So now I'm going to attach my lining. I am firstly going to attach the neck parts, like turn over the neck part of the dress with the lining, make a top stitch before I proceed to turning over the hem of the dress. After that is done, I will just close the sides of the dress excluding the shoulder. So now the next thing I'll be doing is turning over the clothes to the right side through the opening. The armhole and the shoulder was not stitched on, so I will pass the remaining part of the dress through that space. At this point, I have already turned the dress over and I have already gone to iron it. So now the next thing we'll be doing is taking our slit. So I came in by the 1.5 inch I marked for the zipper allowance. Then I also took it up to where I wanted my slit to stop, and I marked the points. So after marking, I cross-checked with my zip and I saw my zip was not long enough to reach that point. So I just had to take the 1.5 inches up to where the zip is going to stop and mark. So now I'm going to head over to the sewing machine and make a small stitch. You can see where my hand is stopping. I'll go and make that small stitch and then fix in my zipper and take my dart. So now I've already fixed my zipper and also taken my dart, and you can see the slit area is just very small because the dress is a short dress. So I've already taken my dart in and I have also ironed. So the next thing we'll be doing is to join the front and the back of the dress together. I have also gone ahead to attach the trimming to the end of the sleeves of the dress. So back to the dress, I'll be attaching my shoulders together. So I will separate the lining of both the front and the back at the shoulder region and place them together. You can notice I'm removing some pins. I held the other parts in place so I can pick my dart without the lining shifting. So I'm opening up the lining and the clothes, like I'm separating them together at the shoulder parts where I did not join. This is the back piece, so I'll just be matching it to that of the front and then making a stitch. So this is just me matching it, then holding it down with my pin before I hand over to the sewing machine to run a stitch across. So this will help give your clothes a neat finish at the shoulder area. After I'm done joining the shoulders together, I'll also proceed to close my armholes. I'll just make a stitch along that region. So while filming this part, I did not notice my camera turn, so just pay attention, you will still get it. Just pay close attention. So at this point, I have already sewn across the armhole area. So the next thing I'll be doing is fixing my sleeve. I am just going to pick my sleeve and attach it. So this is just me making some trimming. I'm just trimming the excess allowance. So if you don't have excess allowance, you can just proceed to attaching your sleeve, but if you have excess allowance, just trim it out before you go ahead to attach your sleeve to the dress. So I just picked up my sleeve and then ensured that the notch part that I made earlier is directly facing the shoulder line of the dress, right sides facing each other. Then after that, I just secured with my pin. Then I'm just going to held over to the sewing machine to stitch the parts together, to stitch it round. So this is just me basically repeating the same thing for the second side. At this point I was already done attaching the sleeve, so the next thing I'll be doing is just to use my 1.5-inch allowance to hold down the side of the dress. So after that was done, this was the outcome of the dress. Thank you for watching this YouTube tutorial. I hope you liked it. Do well to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can as well leave your comments. See you guys on the next tutorial video. Bye.